This is my favorite prime for travel photography, but the problem is that unless you're shooting with a Pentax camera, you're not gonna find this exact focal length. It's impossible. Luckily, there's a focal length that comes really close, and I think it's actually better than this one. But before we dive into it, take a look at a few photos first. What's up guys, my name is Joris and I'm a Belgian travel, documentary and portrait photographer, and more than a year ago I decided to start traveling and photographing the world. I'm still on the road today and I'm making this video from my Airbnb in Valladolid, Mexico. A great town and a must visit when in Mexico, by the way. So make sure to subscribe if you want to find out in which town I will make my next video. But now back to the lens. I took all those photos with that one lens. During the past 2 years of traveling, I've used it 90% of the time, and it's a 55mm 2.8. I'm currently shooting a medium format camera with a crop factor of 0.79, so that's the equivalent of a 43mm on a full frame camera. Now most of you probably think that the standard lens for a full frame camera is the nifty 50mm, and I thought the same, but a few days ago I found out that that's actually not the case. I guess one of my lovely professors probably also told me this when I was studying photography, but that's more than 10 years ago, so yeah, I'm sorry Mr. Goffin. Anyway, the technical definition of a standard lens is one whose focal length roughly matches the diagonal of the film or sensor. And for a standard full-frame camera, that's a focal length of 43mm because the diagonal of the sensor is 43mm. And that's pretty much exactly the focal length of this lens. So I wasn't surprised when I found out about all this, and it's probably one of the reasons why I like this lens so much. But there's only one problem. Sometimes while traveling, I like it to be a little bit wider. And what's wider than a 43mm? Exactly, 35mm. A few years ago, when I was still shooting a full-frame camera, my go-to lens was a Sigma 35mm 1.4, and that was an awesome lens. It was so good that I shot entire assignments just with that lens. Check out these photos from Africa, all taken with that 35mm. I'll put a link in the description if you want to see the whole series. Now, sadly, I can't get a 35mm equivalent for my medium format camera that has weather sealing and autofocus. So I'll have to deal with this one for now and accept the fact that it's a little bit too narrow sometimes. But when I start shooting full frame again, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna glue on a 35mm again. So why should you get a 35mm for travel photography or documentary photography? There are lots of reasons, and first of all, I'm not saying that shooting with a 35mm is the way to go. It all depends on what you like and what style you have, and I always encourage just to do what feels right. Photography is an art, and I'm gonna say it again, there is no right or wrong. You should learn from other people, definitely, but don't forget to experiment and have fun. If the result looks great, and more importantly, if you like the results, then don't listen to people who say you're doing it wrong. Anyway, if you're shooting with a zoom lens at the moment and you want to try something different, definitely try the 35mm. It's a great way to mix it up. Now, the great thing about the 35mm is that it's really close to that 43mm standard, but it's also super versatile. You can use it for pretty much anything. I really like it for landscapes because it's wide but not too wide, and I don't like those super wide lenses that distort the landscape almost. And the 35mm just does a great job at photographing landscapes. Usually I do take a lens that is a lot wider, but I rarely use it. And the 35mm is also great for portraits. Maybe it's not ideal for close-ups because there is some distortion, although usually it's not that bad and I can fix it in post. Where the 35mm really shines is environmental portraits. And that's probably what I like most about it. And don't worry about the depth of field, because there are lots of really fast 35mm lenses out there that get you a nice blurred background. Also a plus if you like to shoot in low light, by the way. There are f1.2 and 1.4 lenses out there that give you a huge advantage over zoom lenses in low light situations. And the cheaper options usually have f2, which still is really fast. I'll link to all those lenses in the description, by the way. The 35mm is also a great lens for street photography, which is a part of travel photography. And sure, a lot of photographers like to use a wide lens for street photography, so they have to go really close into the action. But I think the 35mm is a little bit better because you can go close, but not creepy close, and still feel the action. For street photography, I can't think of any lens that's better because the 50mm is just too narrow for me. 35, perfect. As you can see, you can use the 35mm for basically anything, so if you want to try out a prime that you can leave on your camera for a while, just try a 35mm. You can use it for weddings, street photography, portraits, documentary, it doesn't matter. I've used the 35mm for years and I shot entire assignments on it. No problem at all. Do keep in mind though that if you want to try out the 35mm and you're shooting with an APS-C camera, that you should be looking at 24mm. Okay, that's it guys. So even though I really like this one, that's the equivalent of a 43mm, the 35mm is just a little bit better because 43, sometimes too narrow. Now let me know in the comments, do you like primes? Do you hate them? Do you like the 35mm? Have you ever tried it? And make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button, and see you next time.